4-color Death Shadow versus Bernal Bant Stoneblade. You got to figure someone who was a mainstay on the SCG tour back when it was the SCG Legacy Open circa 2012. I'm going to really sound old now. Joe Bernal was all about Stoneblade in like 2012 to 2014. So I'm glad that he's don't change.
I remember when they invented Stoneblade.
Yeah, basically. You know, it's kind of like Maverick, Bant Stoneblade. They're kind of different, but
somehow
he has Oko
kind
in his
of
deck.
the same. Of course. Who doesn't?
That's always one of those things. Stoneforge Mystic currently seems like is pretty reasonable in Modern.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big drawbacks to the card, at least out the gates, is that it does cost 4 mana, and Modern is kind of a format defined by its mana efficiency.
Right.
And that can be rough, but we see Bernal here with the full 8 mana creatures, 4 Birds of Paradise, 4 Noble Hierarch, just really, really interested in playing 3 drops on turn 2.
Yeah, and this was a deck, you know, I guess back then in Legacy, that was a common plan that people would do.
Yeah.
Just these Bant decks that played very similar to this. Now, he got some upgrades, you know. Joe gets to play Teferi Time Raveler and Oko and Spell Queller.
Yeah, and, you know, Stein's already down to 11 after dismembering a Birds of Paradise. So the Stoneforge Mystic from Bernal on a Batter Skull, this is a real clock.
But outside, it looks like a lot of lands here. With the Batter Skull in hand, it's going to see if there's Fatal Push, something like that. We're going to get Traverse. So we have all 4. We have Land, Artifact, Instant Sorcery, or Instant Creature. So that has Delirium. Force Negation from Joe will stop that from happening, and Death's Shadow is a 4/4.
Bigger than a Batter Skull almost.
Right. A pass from Joe. Batter Skull is the next setup play. Might just be all lands on Abe Stein. Yeah, I believe so. We get a Waterlogged Grove. Or no, that is not Nurturing Peatland. There we go. And Batter Skull, Assassin's Trophy.
Ooh.
We'll take care of it.
Okay, so now this is actually a spot where even if Stein doesn't have much gas left in the tank, he's really far ahead on the battlefield.
Well, Joe can't really attack back or anything.
Exactly.
Yeah. He needs something like Path to Exile.
The nice thing about something like Batter Skull is even though the Death Shadow is growing, since you're gaining life, that kind of offsets a bit of the clock there.
Right. Back to Joe we go. 3 mana means it's Teferi Time Raveler. Unsummons the Death Shadow, but I don't know that Joe is going to attack here.
That's a tough call. It comes down to if you want to grow this Death Shadow or if you think it doesn't matter. Because you think that Stein's just going to grow it anyway.
Looks like he's going to go ahead and do it, and wants to get the Exalted points in as well with Noble Hierarch, so Abe down to 7. 1 card in Bernal's hand.
Yeah, this is a spot where if Bernal's also kind of on empty, he wants to put Stein closer to dead.
Fatal Push was the pickup for Stein. So 2 lands, Fatal Push, Death's Shadow. Draws a card off the Peatland. Thoughtseize is the pickup. Is he willing to fetch to 6 and Thoughtseize down to 4 is the question.
That is tough.
I mean, I kind of like it. So bear with me here. If he goes down to 4 here, then next turn he can fetch Shock down to 1 and one-shot his opponent.
That's true. Oh,
and he hits. Was Path to Exile.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, a huge win for Abe Stein. That was the card that Bernal needed.
Oh my!
So now the Shadow's a 9/9. Bernal's back to block. Joe says, "Go." Abe, does he play a fetch land before attacking here?
You probably want to. It threatens lethal.
Yeah, he drew Blood Crypt, it looks like. So he's going to draw a card. Draws into, was that Teamer Battle Rage?
Oh no, he played a Nurturing Peatland to cycle. Oh.
He can't do it yet, can he?
No.
He'll have to wait. Is there a risk in attacking? He's going to attack. Will Joe take it? He attacks Teferi, so Teferi's gone. Stein says go. He does have Fatal Push in hand to go with the Teamer Battle Rage.
I like this attack from Stein, just because it doesn't change his clock to go upstairs at Bernal when you have this Battle Rage.
And Joe has found the path. And so that extra window that Abe cost himself, I mean, I guess there's no way to do it, right? You can't draw the card off the Peatland to get the Battle Rage and then cast it. There just was no way.
Right.
Finds mana Morphos. He needs another creature. Both players just playing this efficient magic, fair magic, but playing off the top. Tap land for Abe. Another Teferi for Joe. Fatal Push. Board's completely clean.
This has got to be good for Bernal. The top of his library is strong.
Well, and I especially like that he rolls the Teferi up to 5. So for this exact situation.
Oh.
You know, it buys him another turn, another way to find something. And we see through the deck there's a bunch of cards that Joe could hit here. Jace the Mind Sculptor should win the game if he finds it. I think, well, I guess, you know, Stoneforge Mystic might be good enough here.
Right. Spell Queller is also a strong one.
Fetch land. And he's actually going to just deck thin.
Yeah, the idea here is hitting a land is so much worse than hitting a spell that all those percentage points are just going to add up and be worth it.
We're not playing Legacy. There's no Brainstorm to wait for. So he bounces and draws. Does he look at the card? He passes. It's going to be Death Shadow again. Says go. Now this time it's lethal unless Joe has something. It's going to be Oko.
Oh.
Okay. Death Shadow. Going to be elked. There's a mana leak in Joe's hand.
This is where it feels like things are starting to slip away from Stein.
Right. You know, which Planeswalker do you even attack? Like, it has to be Oko, or maybe not. Teferi goes away. It has to be Teferi, I guess.
Getting one of the Planeswalkers off the battlefield is such a big deal.
Oko's so powerful.
It really is.
Seeing it again out of a completely different deck. Well, it does so much here. It stopped Abe's one-turn win. It also now can gain life.
Yeah, this is pretty bad.
Another food token.
It's going to be hard for Stein to really break out of this.
And you're just waiting for that Jace the Mind Sculptor from Joe to finally clean this up.
Yep. Jace the Mind Sculptor, Stoneforge into a sword.
So Tarmogoyf in hand for Stein. We'll see whether he just plays it into the Oko. Elk attacks, and he's going upstairs. Here's a Tarmogoyf, and it's mana leak proof.
Yeah, and the idea here is that you're making it so you're either just forcing Bernal to gain life with this food rather than get any value out of 3/3s. If you go after the Oko, you're going to deal more than 10 damage to this Oko by the time that's all said and done.
So we put about this. Joe just drew another Oko here. So I guess this first one could trade Tarmogoyf with the food. No, Tarmogoyf's too big. It could trade. It could. I mean, there's a lot of options with two Okos. He can start making his own food into Elk. He can make Abe's cards into Elk.
This is a spot where I would likely see an exchange of the food for the Death Shadow, and then Oko to the new Oko to just make the Tarmogoyf a 3/3.
I think that's what I like too, and that's what we'll see. The first is the trade. Abe is thinking about responding. I don't think it. This is a bluff.
If there's a way that he could destroy the food token in response, then the exchange doesn't happen.
Assassin's Trophy. Now this, I think, will get mana leaked.
It's hard to imagine that it doesn't. The Death Shadow deck is just so efficient on its mana that the door for that to even work is kind of closing.
Right. guess the other option is Joe could just sacrifice the food in response.
Right.
And hold his Mana Leak. But I think you're right, Mana Leak's just not really a card anymore.
Right, and either way, the Death Shadow is not going to Bernal's side of the battlefield. Ooh, the Deer's Shadow.
I like that.
I want to see a Fauna Shaman get elked.
Then it's just Fauna.
Yeah.
Just cross out Shaman.
Yeah.
Mana Leak does pull the trigger. Insists that this exchange happens. So, there we go. Another Oko. Elk the Tarmogoyf. And despite Abe drawing above average here, he is...
Oh, was that another land?
Not going to be able to do much. See, I mean, he can attack Oko down to 2, but then the Elk will trade and Joe gets to keep the Oko.
Yeah.
It's so hard. How close is this, right? Because Abe has a Teamer Battle Rage in hand, and Joe's at 7.
Yeah, this feels like a spot where you likely have to blow your Battle Rage just attacking down this Oko to try and get back down to top deck mode and hope that you draw better.
What does that look like?
Bernal bricking, Stein ripping a creature.
It's just any creature, really? Yeah, Joe makes an lethal attack, so Abe pops the food token. Says go. Elk stare at each other now. I believe Abe would be at 4 here, is that right? No, actually at 3. This is still right, 7 and 3. Tarmogoyf.
There it is.
That is the draw. And I like this. He plays the Tarmogoyf first. Does he even attack? No, he's just too scared of path.
Yeah, at this point, it's closer to free to attack with your near-lethal Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, I almost kind of liked the attack. I actually might be able to send the Elk last turn. I just don't think he's beating path anyway.
Sure, that makes sense.
But it's very close. Thoughtseize in hand. Does he want to fire it off? He does. He'll go to 1.
Oh,
and there was the path.
Yeah.
Okay. Good enough investment. Now he knows. Pass, pass. It was a fetch land from Abe Stein. Noble Hierarch. Okay. Has to block. And that is it. Joe Bernal takes game 1.
Oh, that Exalted trigger is so subtle, but so powerful there.
Again, I just think this is Oko.
Right. Oko just defined that game. Let's count it down. It basically turned 2 creatures into 3/3s.
Stole a creature.
Stole one of them. Gained...
Well, gained your opponent's
8
3 life. Oh, no, I mean on attacks. Just by taking attacks.
Right.
Yeah.
8 life or something to that effect. No, because then another 3, so 10.
What I like, the one of the ways I want to talk about it is let's look at it next to the other cards. It just shared the battlefield there with Tarmogoyf and with Stoneforge Mystic, and I think clearly was the better card.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Oko is just defining any matchup that you can bring into a fair space. Oko is going to take over it because it just completely beats up on 2 of the most powerful card types in Modern.
And there's not too much that Abe can do about this. I mean, the issue is that his deck, as Death Shadow, is a threat light deck. So a card like Oko is just really... We saw how scary it is to get your Death Shadow elked.
Right. So the only things that we could really see coming in from Stein's side, Plague Engineer mops up some of the mana creatures, but is not great otherwise. It just is a creature. But past that, Kolaghan's Command is going to be fine. Veil of Summer is probably fine-ish. It's a stifle for an Oko activation.
Sure.
Or an Oko elktivation, if you will. That was a very polite laugh, and I really appreciate it.
Only the first one, because otherwise you don't draw the card?
Right.
Okay.
Well, so Stifle doesn't draw a card.
Oh, but I don't... That's true.
You also could end up seeing Collective Brutality come in if Stein wants to be able to go after a mana creature and try to tag a path to exile at the same time.
Turn 1 Thoughtseize here. Path, Noble Hierarch, Birds of Paradise, Sword of Feast and Famine, 3 lands.
Here, depending on the the texture of Stein's hand, you may just be priced into this Feast and Famine.
It is the only real card, right?
Right. The rest of it's just kind of lands, fast lands, and Path to Exile.
Yeah. And lands for your opponent. It's all land.
Oops, all lands.
So, Bobble. It's a Death Shadow. Abe already, thanks to some pair of Street Wraiths, into Death Shadow territory.
No big deal.
Looks like he did miss the second land drop. He had 2 shadows to cast there, but only was able to cast 1.
Yeah, you still end up keeping these hands a lot of the time with that many redraws in a turn 2 Death Shadow.
Sure. Let's see where Bernal wants to go here. How he chooses to leverage that Path to Exile is interesting.
It looks like he picked up a copy of Winds of Abandon as well, which is the Mizium Mortars meets Path to Exile from Modern Horizons.
Six mana to overload it.
And you know, Bernal's not that far away. If
No.
Stein can't grow these shadows very well in the next turn or so, then Bernal doesn't really need to pull the trigger on 1-for-1s if he can just blow out both Death Shadows with a single card here. It's not like Bernal doesn't have the mana sources.
Path to Exile on one of the 2 Death Shadows. This will get the Swamp from Abe's deck. That's the only basic.
This is Bernal just playing it kind of safe against these shadows. Like, the games you lose are the ones where all of a sudden Stein gets way ahead on mana and is actually able to just turn these Death Shadows into 6/6s or something.
You see just Joe playing it very defensively. Winds of Abandons away the other Death Shadow. Still waiting for a payoff card. And that is the downside of what's going on here, is that eventually Abe will draw out of this.
Right, when you play this many lands and mana creatures, you also are kind of diluting your deck with reactive things, Winds of Abandon, for example. And the equipment is not that great if you draw it without the Stone Forge.
Both players looking for a threat. Let's see if Abe can find one first.
And we see a Stubborn Denial hanging out in Stein's hand. So that's another reason that Bernal doesn't necessarily want to go for the huge overloaded Winds of Abandon.
Yeah, it looks like... And he just fetched tapped for a green mana. I was going to say Tarmogoyf plus Stubborn Denial, but I don't think that's the case. Or he's waiting for it to be 4 power.
Right.
Swing in for 2 from the Birds of Paradise. Double Exalted from Noble Hierarchs. Bobble just from Stein, fetch back from Bernal. The Bird of Paradise might just do all the work here.
Yeah, Stein is close to dead.
It's just the round of medium beats. There's Stoneforge Mystic. That's a real card.
I'm prepared to call this mediocre beats. Or, yeah, mediocre beats. This is not medium. Attacking for 2 with the Birds of Paradise.
Mediocre is worse than medium.
I think so.
Okay. Sword of Fire and Ice. That would be lethal next turn.
Oh, and Bernal's holding up a Spell Queller.
That might do it. What does Stein have? He has a full grip here, but... Right, so the idea is Joe next turn, 2 mana to put the Stoneforge into play, 2 mana to equip. If he draws another land, 3 mana for the Spell Queller. And that is 6, yeah. Abe extends the hand. So Bant Stoneblade and Joe Bernal take the match 2-0.
Yeah, and that looked like a spot where he did have Tarmogoyf hanging out in his hand there at the very end, but he had the read on the removal spell and knew that he was just dead to this bird.
Yeah, there wasn't really a way around.